four amazing people at various stages of their career at Hunter. And they are going to share tips and they are going to share things to think about in the classroom. And then we're going to have a good sort of couple of minutes for a Q&A. So think of your questions, put them in the chat. We'll also drop resources in the chat. We're going to start with the amazing Christine Willard from Special Education. We are so glad you are here. Thank you for coming to ACERT, and we'll start. Thank you, Christine.
Okay, good afternoon. I think it's an advantage to go first. We'll see. But welcome everyone. I'm Christine Willard. I've been in teacher ed for over 30 years. Yikes. And I've been at Hunter approximately, I was thinking about that, maybe 8 years in adjunct capacity in adolescent special education, working mostly with graduate students and online as well. So this was great. The prompt was really interesting. What do I wish I would have known upon coming into Hunter as a teacher? And I think I always knew this thing, but I knew it more for myself, which is kind of ironic. And what I wished I would have known was to really delve much more into my students' contexts, in terms of particularly their teaching background. Um, I always have my students make sure they put that in their lesson plans, and I kind of hold them accountable. But here I am going, oh, I have to get these classes ready, and I get all in my head, and all about my content and all this great stuff I have for them. And I forget that dialogic classroom and how incredibly valuable that is to be a community dweller versus the fount of knowledge. We all know that we're being replaced very quickly as the fount of knowledge, but community is everything. So I started to realize that there were notice things. I'd start teaching and my students would say, whoa, 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 what did they just say? I can't do that in my class. Or what did you do? And I was like, they don't care as much about what I'm saying. They want to like talk to each other and they want to make it, they want their universes to come together. They want this not to be a parallel universe, but they want to know what I'm saying, and what we're doing is relevant for their classroom. So if I might share my screen here, and hopefully this will work. Okay, are you able to see my screen? Okay, great. So this is what I wish I knew going in. And let's see, whoop, whatever that did, go away. My goodness. Okay. I'm sorry, I'm just going to have to move this because I can't get rid of this, whatever this is. Oh, there we go. Okay. All right. So the power of context, as I mentioned, I noticed that throughout the years, my graduate students enjoy and even thrive when the assignments and the content are tailored to their daily experience. And these are just some of the thoughts I had. Um, Students enjoy tailored assignments. It gives them greater engagement. Um, what I also noticed was I was literally frustrating some of my students when I asked them to do things in the classroom, applications, assignments that either were irrelevant, that had nothing to do with their context, or they had restrictions and they weren't able to do them. So I was really, rather than allowing them to engage, I was literally making a roadblock for them and causing frustration, and never intended to do that. But again, if I prioritize curriculum over context, it happens every time. I miss somebody because they have all different settings. The productivity in breakout rooms, I noticed when I changed up my breakout rooms to maybe pair students who had taught the same number of years, student teachers, paras, or if I decided to do, like the one room schoolhouse type of thing where the sages teach the other students. There was all these creative ways of working these rooms that I hadn't really utilized and not really grappling with context. And then I noticed that my students, their assignments were just better. The more I contextualized, they just got into the assignments a lot more. Then one of the biggest dividends here was that I was, rather than just becoming an instructor, I was becoming a mentor. A mentor is somebody who's invited into a student's life, but you really need to delve into their lived experiences to mentor. Otherwise, you're just a plain old professor at that point. So here's just a couple takeaways for you. And I'm a little sketchy with my timing here since I'm going first, but hopefully this will work out. Let me make this a little larger because it's tiny. So this is just something I thought about, and I'll put this in the chat room also. At the beginning of the year, even prior to starting class, maybe if I have their names a week before, I do a graduate student context and teaching survey. And I don't need to know, names and politics or anything, but just kind of large themes about what they're dealing with, their professional background and current setting, the ethos of their institution, the assets and constraints that they have at their particular institution, their professional goals. I want to know what unique expertise or contextual insight they're most excited to share in the class, because a lot of them are. And then, some of them humble me with the things they're able to do. It's incredible to me. And then curriculum activities. What are they presently working on? Because if I know these things, I can really make my class so much more viable for them. So this is something I would put on Brightspace, early on, have as an assignment and have them do that for me. Um, the other thing I do is called a matrix toolbox. And this is just something I've employed most recently when I want them to read, but it's not everything has to be heavy-handed. The reading is something I want them to accomplish, but I have other bigger projects and I can't make everything equally weighted. I have them do the reading. And if you'll see on here, when they're doing the reading, they write down 5 topics. And then does it resonate with me? Is it foreign to me? Can I use this? Or I've already observed this topic from the book. And then I ask them in 250 words to include any of the following. But the ones I really appreciate are connections to strategies they use in their own classroom, or how you plan to use these ideas in your own classroom. So again, this is another way of contextualizing these assignments so that, there's a little bit more engagement there. Um, and then finally, I won't read this whole thing, but the gist of this is one of the assignments my student did when I did ask about, how can you apply this to the classroom in your reading matrix? And she wrote about the book by Muhammad, Cultivating Genius, which I know a lot of us have used, and it's so provocative and interesting in the classroom. And she talked right away about, these constraints we have in my own particular school. We're doing this book, about a Mexican girl named Maria, and it looked on the outside to be culturally responsive teaching, and I was excited. But as I looked more closely, she said I started to realize that it was about trauma. It was all about trauma. And she kind of sums it up by saying, for my students, this story felt a bit too close to home. Not that they could not handle the difficult topic, but they shouldn't have to, especially during a particular climate when the topic of deportation feels top of the mind of so many families. To Muhammad's point, if the only story being told or studied all year long that centered Hispanic voices and experiences was that of trauma, grief, and abuse, it's not culturally relevant. And while it isn't problematic on its own, when it becomes the only part of history taught, it is very limiting. So she took her classroom experience, the reading, and melded it together. Boy, did it make my class so much more meaningful. So this is pretty much what I wanted to share with you this afternoon. Okay,
Thank you so much.
you're welcome. Let me
So
get out
good.
of here.
And Professor Peros, whenever you're ready.
All right, I'm going to try to share my screen now. Okay, I am having a hard time keeping this to 8 minutes, but I'm timing myself and I'm going to really do my best.
You're good. You're fine.
Okay. So I came at this through a different lens. I have been in the DOE for 12 years as a special educator, District 75 special education teacher in middle school. And now I'm a unit coordinator. I'm a school building leader. So I look at working with students with disabilities and also with special educators through multiple lenses. But when I was considering joining the Zoom, I spoke to Gina and I said, honestly, I felt prepared when I was offered an adjunct teaching position at Hunter. I just finished my first year. I've taught 3 courses. One was synchronous, 2 were async. I said, but what I'd like to talk about, if I may, is how I took my years of experience as an in-person teacher and how I apply that to the virtual platform. And I was told that I could, so I just wanted to share with everyone. What I have found to be the biggest way to increase the success and achievement of my students is high levels of student engagement. And I've learned how to have high levels of student engagement in synchronous courses, asynchronous courses, through meaningful assignments and final projects that make a lasting impression, both for the students and for me. When I'm teaching a synchronous course, I said how one thing about my instructional craft when I was in person at D75, and it's not easy to be a D75 teacher, it's not easy to be a middle school teacher. I did both. Was how do I get my students engaged? I have students on the spectrum. I have students with, intellectual disabilities, students, oppositional defiance, emotional disturbance. Where's the hook? The hook is sincerity. I found that leading with my heart and being really sincere about wanting them to learn and succeed, they knew it, they felt it, and they gave me so much more in return. And I had to figure out how to do that in an online platform. And I succeeded. My first class was a synchronous class on literacy throughout all content areas for students with disabilities in middle school. And I follow the same model of instruction that I do in the classroom. I use the workshop model. So I started off every class with the do now to activate prior knowledge. I did I do, we do, you do. And we had so much fun. So I just wanted to give you a couple of examples of what I did. So here's an example of a do now that requires one answer. What kind of instruction places heavier emphasis on student-directed personal experiences? Of course, the answer is inquiry-based instruction. And everyone would be unmuted. And the first person to answer correctly, Zoom is great because you see their big head, like, they're the person that answers first. Everybody would clap and cheer, and it would just get them motivated, and it would make them recall what they learned from the prior class. This was really fun because there were 5 answers. So I had 28 students trying to give 5 answers, not repeating the one before, and they wanted to be the one to be called on. It wasn't chaotic. It was so respectful and so fun. And they were highly engaged, highly vested, and they were also smiling. And I want my students to be happy, virtually, in person, regardless. When I do my straight lecture for synchronous classes, I stop frequently to check for understanding, to make sure that they're not just, sitting there and playing on their phones. So I do stop and I check for understanding. And we have some pretty, heavy questions to think about. Choose one SEL competency and how that would manifest itself in your classroom. And everybody speaks. I don't cold call. Everybody volunteers to answer. This was a really fun we do in 5 words or less, describe or explain UDL, but you can't use any of those words there. The stuff that I got from them was so profoundly cerebral. It was incredible, the stuff that they said. I found myself getting a little emotional when I saw that they were really understanding the concepts that I was teaching, which means that they would be able to transfer it to their own classrooms as teachers. So then my second class that I taught was async. And I said, okay, I just had a great first class. It was synchronous. How do I get the same level of engagement and, meaningful connections where we're not doing the live Zooms? And the first thing I saw was, if my Google Classroom was fun, visually appealing, and updated frequently, there were more chances of the students really looking to the Google Classroom to see what was going on the stream. What did I just do? I am terrible with this. I just moved this here. Okay, let me see. I don't know, can you see this? This is where's my Google? Here it is. So my students love my Bitmojis. So here is one of my Google Classrooms where I was constantly congratulating them on their work, reminding them of assignments. This one was drum roll, please. They just got I got so many messages from them saying, please keep the Bitmojis up. It's so fun. So it's little things like that that really make a difference. Student choice, student voice. In my ACERT classes, I allow students to vote for whether or not they would like to do 1 to 2 live Zoom classes, strictly voluntary. If they say yes, I also throw out dates and times and they choose. So I'm not dictating this. We all work together as a team to find out how we can do it. Um, I make sure that my discussion board topics are meaningful. My check for understandings are always very content based, but for discussion board topics, I want the topics to be able to transcend just that one class that I'm teaching and for it to permeate through whatever these teachers are teaching in their classes. For example, I taught a math class. 99% of the students said, I hate math. I'm no good at math. I'm never going to teach math. I don't want to do math. They all left that class saying, I could teach math if I absolutely had to. It's not that bad because I made it more than math. Think back on your best and worst math experiences as a student when you were a kid. How have those experiences shaped you as a teacher? Right? That got them talking and thinking. How does presuming competence when teaching math increase the chances of your students' achievement increasing? That could be social studies, science, ELA. It just happened that this was math. Why should assessment results inform your instruction? Again, that could be across any content area. Why is a differentiated classroom an equitable classroom? Right? So I always try to make my discussion board topics relevant to the course that I'm teaching, but relevant to teaching in general. I also believe that individualized detail and sincere feedback is critical on the online platform. I got that kind of feedback from Gina Riley when she was my professor and my mentor at Hunter, and it made all the difference, especially when students are doing things right. They need the feedback when they're doing things right just as much as they need the feedback when they're not getting full credit on assignments. And this is an example of one of my students from a course that I just took. She was struggling for module 1. We had 4 modules. It was a quick 4-week class. She improved so much because I gave her really specific feedback and I told her in my feedback, you're doing amazing. And she was so grateful. And I said, but now the joke's on you because now I know the kind of work that you could do and you have to keep it up. I think she wound up getting an A or an A plus in the course because she really took my feedback to heart. She knew I was genuine and sincere in my efforts as her professor to get her to learn. And it was amazing. I also think you should have a final assignment or a final project that's not going to be arduous and laborious and that it's going to make an impression to them and to you as the professor. Yes, my students write papers. They have to have in-text citations. They write lesson plans. But sometimes I think it's okay to think out of the box. I just taught a 4-week class on classroom management, and their final project was exactly what I'm doing now. Create a slide presentation with a video lecture of 5 things you will do in your class to effectively manage behaviors going forward and 1 thing you will not do. The work that I got, so many students got so emotional about how much they learned in the 4 short weeks. This is an example of one of my students. I won't play his video, but like, look at the work that he gave me. And he said he got an A plus in the course. He said he enjoyed the course and the assignment so much. And that's what I wanted. I wanted the students to really connect to the content of the course and be able to transfer it. I'm going to let you listen to this just for 2 seconds, if I may.
I don't think we can hear it, but you can tell us what she
No,
said.
I cannot hear you.
Can't hear it? Okay, so unfortunately you can't hear that. She said that taking the course on classroom management changed the way she looked at herself as a mother, as an advocate, as an educator. And as a professor, it's so humbling and so heartwarming to know that what we're doing transcends just this course and this grade. Like I take a lot of, I'm very honored to be an adjunct. I have a child with a disability. He's a District 75 student. Any of these people could have been my son's teacher. It's not just about them doing well in my course. I'm turning out future teachers, and our exceptional students deserve the best. And that's the lens that I look at everything through as an adjunct. And that's all I wanted to share. 9 minutes, not bad.
Much. Thank you so, so much. Awesome. And Sasha, go for it.
Okay, I'm up. All right. Well, I don't have any screen to share, but I have lots I can talk about, certainly. I made my own little bullet points of sorts of things, right, reflecting on the things I wish I knew Yeah, I'm going into my 15th year here at Hunter and teaching in general. And I was an adjunct for 10 years. And I'm going into my fourth year then as a full-time member of the English faculty. Um, and being predominantly in the composition and rhetoric camp of the English department, I teach a lot of first-year writing. So I'm getting the newbies, right? I'm getting the ones who are the first experience. And it's a lot, the course. I feel it's a huge responsibility and privilege, though, to be able to teach first year composition. And I think in the beginning, I didn't think about the wide range that what they first do in that course is their first experience in college research writing, and how that transcends to all of their other classes and the research they will do elsewhere. And you know, for the remainder of their college and perhaps graduate school careers. So, you know, that to me, I never really thought broadly beyond, right? Like just the skills. And so I think too, particularly one thing I think, like I said, 15 years is a long time, how much things would change, all of the things we've been through within the institution, outside of the institution. And the fact that, you know, many students come in now never even having written a research paper. So for many, it's not even their first college research paper, it's their first research paper. You know, things have changed a lot since then. So certainly, you know, we've had to rethink the way we do things. Things change, the curriculum changes. You know, we hope to be doing the best. As I said, you know, kind of telling a little personal anecdote of my own experience. And in the process of moving, you know, have the plan A, have the plan B, have the plan C, be willing to scrap things that aren't working. And some things will work for a while. It's funny. And then they won't work anymore. But I think that's part of the fun of this job too, is just that, you know, the same curriculum is not going to work. The same assignments are not always going to work. And even beyond the obvious changes, I think just the things that, it's funny, like they've always been there, but I've never really paid attention to them. I think particularly, right, as being an adjunct for 10 years and, you know, sometimes running between 4 different schools to teach, I never thought much about a sense of community, right? And how important it was to have people to lean on who shared my experiences, who I could commiserate with and laugh with and toss ideas back and forth with. And to think too that, you know, interestingly enough, Hunter being a commuter school, I think our students, it's very easy for them to face that sense of isolation as well. I think this can feel very lonely sometimes. And so definitely one thing I've been focusing more on is, you know, building a sense of community. They're coming in, they're new students, many of them don't know each other. And particularly more, right, they face other challenges. A lot of them come to school and they have to go to a job. And I've had students who work 3 jobs. And I get it. Like sometimes these, and I mean, I think we all see it too, like, right, when like we have like a department meeting, Katie, I see you, my fellow English, and they're like, okay, everybody's gonna come in on Friday, and you could see everybody like, oh, great, like we have to come in on Friday. But then you get there and it's like, it really is nice to see everyone. Like, I'm glad I took the time to do this. I'm glad I'm seeing Hunter is such a great bunch of students and faculty and just staff in general, just a great sense of community. And I think it's very easy to sort of get lost in the shuffle of things and the list of responsibilities. And I mean, our students are really burdened, I think, sometimes with a long list of responsibilities. And they're even resistant sometimes, I think, when I'm like, you're going to work in a group and you're going to get to know each other and you're going to share your work. And they're like, they kind of grumble. But then I hear them say like, well, let's go get lunch together. And, you know, they keep in touch and they really do need that push a little bit. And I mean, I just know from experience myself, sometimes things that sound like they're going to be miserable do end up being a lot of fun. But I think also too, it works with freshmen. I do teach upper level classes in rhetoric as well. And if anything, just seeing what each other, is seeing what the other person is doing, whether it's a group or a partnership in the class, and saying, okay, like I'm going to learn from this person and I'm going to provide feedback. At all stages, I've noticed they do seem to enjoy that. Again, sometimes there's a little resistance, and I get it. They have a lot on their plate. They say, I just want to do this and be done with it. I'm not here to mess around, I'm not here to make friends, not realizing how important that is, because I know that that's something I overlooked. And I'm very lucky to have not only great colleagues, but great friends that I've made here. Many of whom I've known for years, and some are newer. And I think, wow, like what a wonderful group of people. And I love when my students see that also. So I have, and I think particularly too, coming back, I know we're a few years away now from COVID and the pandemic and online learning, but that did play a role, I think, in their abilities to work with one another, to participate in class vocally, and to be comfortable with those things, and which is very understandable. I think about, the pre-COVID classrooms where everybody's like, sometimes I have to be like, well, let's calm down, everybody. You'll all have your turn. And now it feels like pulling teeth sometimes. I notice the more we move away from that time, it's getting a little bit better, but they still need that push. And I know we can attribute to that to more things than COVID, right? Like, oh, everybody's online, right? So much of their life is just communicating through screens and not having the same in-person interactions that we had. Yeah, that's probably true. I'm no expert in that field, but right, I want to give them more of that in-person interaction, right? Those interpersonal connections. And we're here in a classroom, we can do that. One thing I've also found is, when I began teaching, I was definitely, as much as look, it's a lot of work teaching, but I think it can be really good, rewarding, and fun work. But I was taking on way too much work. I was planning everything, I was lecturing, and students, I don't think, get a whole lot from that. Sometimes I wanted to get them more involved. And so I have designed more activities, which I think are transferable between disciplines, whether it's peer reviewing each other's work, doing research together, pairing people maybe who are working on similar projects. In English 120, they do have to write a research project. In my class, it's of their own, just whatever they want to write about. Obviously, we work through the scaffolding process. But if I can pair them together to sort of say like, oh, I read this article and this might be useful to you. Also, too, I offer anything I make them do extra will always be extra credit, of course, and it has to be an incentive. But one thing I've noticed too, and right, their students are all going to be kind of at different points and levels. In particular, I think as we get further into the semester, you see that they're kind of running on different tracks, where some are kind of cruising ahead and doing okay with minimal interaction from me at that point. Obviously they receive feedback from me, but what I've done is paired those who have like an A-ish average in the class, and those who would like an A and are not there and are not confident in doing that. Obviously I help them as well, but it's peer mentoring, I call it. And it's up to them. I don't force anyone, obviously. It's up to them to sign up for these things. And they both receive extra credit, both the mentor and the mentee, in the process. And it's really worked out well. They do really well together. I mean, I'm very grateful that they say that my feedback, is helpful to them. But I think there's something different about hearing from someone who's going through the same process as them. And being accountable for one another, of course. And I would just say too, let's always keep in mind, what our students bring to the classrooms already, and not just like the deficit of what they didn't learn. They have a lot to offer, and I think they just need to be reminded of that. And just like I said, you can only plan for so much. Do that. Be expected for, for any challenges that might come your way. Embrace the challenges. I know in the English, Katie and I were just talking about this yesterday. We have a new one where we're not going to be able to be paired with the library anymore. We used to have library visits in English 120. And that is I think we're all very disappointed about that. And it's definitely going to pose some challenges because that's their first real, I think, interaction with the library and learning about the research databases here at Hunter. And yeah, I mean, that's like one thing now I'm thinking about, like, how am I going to make up for this in some way? But, you can only do so much about these things. I say, like, yeah, it's normal to be discouraged sometimes, but take it and, at the risk of sounding cheesy, make it a positive thing somehow. I'm thinking about how I can get my students involved in this process, right, of learning about research through the library. So I guess those are my things. I have no idea how long I took, but I'm going to stop there. This is what happens when I riff. But thank you guys.
Thank you so much, Sasha. And then we have Sam Hannah.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much, Gina, and thank you, everybody. I'm so sorry to be joining late. I had to pick up my daughter from daycare, and the ferries only run once every 45 minutes during the daytime. So, but here I am, and it's great to catch the tail end of Sasha's talk. I really resonate with a lot of what was being said there, and I'm glad that she did say what she said, because I hope that what I can say can be a contribution to those same themes. Let me get my timer started to make sure that this doesn't run on to be an epic, a Homeric epic. I don't have slides, I just have notes, and I will just start off by saying that I don't actually have a name for what it is exactly that I want to call this sort of quality that I'm trying to talk about. The working title is Teaching with Emotional Courage, because I had a very interesting experience of, again, just like Sasha said, teaching during the pandemic, before and after and during, was a very interesting natural experiment for me to see the differences from my perceptions about students. The opening question I feel prompted to ask is, how easy is it for us to judge by appearances that your students are keen to learn? How can you look at a student and know if they're particularly willing to engage? What I wish that the headline is, what I wish I'd known is that I found it very hard to tell by looking who is engaged in the learning process, and that having the courage to give students attention and encouragement, regardless of whether they seem withdrawn, will get you better outcomes than if you allow them to stay in that place. So what I've written here builds on an article a short piece that I wrote recently for an anthology about both being a parent and a teacher at the same time, about the idea of creating a holding space, which you do, of course, for children, a space where they can feel safe, and then they can go out to explore and then return as they need. And the idea of whether, to the extent to which that can be put in the classroom as well, in addition to parenting work. Anyway, I'll get into this short story I had, which is, I had a little bit of teaching experience at the new school before I came to CUNY, which was a very sort of average first starting out teaching experience. I was just focused on getting the basics right, trying to keep the classroom conversation going. And I sort of, put that in a box and didn't come back to teaching for a couple of years until I started doing a PhD program at the Graduate Center. When I became a teaching fellow at Hunter. But I became a teaching fellow at Hunter during the pandemic, and I started off this teaching where I was much more responsible for the students than I was at the new school as a teaching assistant, and I had to do it over Zoom, where everyone was saying, you can't be sure of this, you can't be sure of that, and it's a very demanding experience. As I'm sure most or perhaps all of you will know, the students will tend to want to have their cameras off for most or all of the class, or many or most of them will. And that means you really can't tell how engaged they are unless you force them to, put something in the chat, or, really call on them, which of course many, especially freshmen, are not willing to do. And I have been teaching what's mostly a freshman course, English 220, Introduction to Writing About Literature. It's usually mostly freshmen. And so when you're dealing with them, there's no assumption that they'll have the confidence or the willingness to what would you say, to participate in class. And so, knowing this, I taught on the belief that you can't tell whether the students are fully engaged just because their screens are turned off. And so I didn't know what to expect when I got to the end of the semester, but when I did get to the last class of the semester, the feedback was overwhelmingly positive, and many of them had said, "Oh, this class was a lifeline for me during the pandemic, and I really enjoyed it, and thank you so much." And I thought that's so crazy. I couldn't tell for a second by looking at what was going on the Zoom screen that most of them actually were at some point feeling really engaged with the class, and so I thought this is really strange. Next semester, class is hybrid, of course, coming out of the pandemic. And once a week, I was in the classroom, and it was a totally different experience because the students would come in, and a lot of them, they come in with arms folded, and they're looking downcast, or they're looking distracted. Often, they'll keep their coats on for the whole class, indicating in a way that not really, as I said, the classroom isn't somewhere they feel necessarily very comfortable in. And I thought, this is weird. I feel as though I'm being confronted here. This is a confrontation environment. I thought, okay, you got good feedback last class. You seem to be a good teacher, so just keep up the front of being positively engaging. And it was a much more difficult experience because, in a sense, the proof was there in front of you of like these students don't appear to be engaged in the way that you thought they might be. Anyway, got to the end of the semester and I had the same experience. The students said to me, "Oh, this is a really great class. Thank you so much. I wish I'd focused more from the beginning," which is something that's bittersweet when you get that from a student right at the end. And so for me, the lesson that I learned from all of this, and I'm not saying this is a particularly advanced lesson. I've only been teaching for 4 years or so, but my experience was that you really can't tell by looking at a CUNY student whether or not they're fully engaged. And I think part of what that is they feel as though they need to play it cool a bit because they see their peers doing that, and they don't want to be the odd one out to begin with, especially when they're just starting out there in their first year at Hunter. So when I call it emotional courage, I guess what I'm saying is you have to. I felt as though I've gotten better results by being the person who is in the room, standing for a kind of engagement that helps to draw student individuality out, right? They may not be, you say that you have to read the room, and and of course you do, but I think there's also an important aspect. There's an importance in not taking cues from the students, at least to begin with, because they might not feel safe at that stage to step out. Simple things, putting their hand up, making contributions, summarizing the view of a student who was in their group from a think, pair, share 5 minutes ago, and that can take time. So I often, have very small strategies that I don't claim to be original in this, but if a student answers a question that's not really on the right, if they answer a question, it's mostly not right. You can say you're on the right track. You're on the right there. Not simply saying, not quite, and then move on. You say you're getting there, but you're not quite there yet. Or if they give an offbeat response, you can say, that's one way of thinking about it, and then you move the conversation forward. If they're tripping over words in class, you say, oh, that passage was really tricky. Even I trip over that sometimes. And so that cultivating that kind of environment can allow students to feel safe in coming forwards. And I say this not because I think it's something new, but because I personally learned that kind of courage to step forward and be willing to offer them with an open heart the opportunity to speak out is something that can take practice. And I've almost given up from time to time on that one. So I'll read this. Let's see, what have I got here? They're all okay. The last sentence I have is, part of me wonders if they're all secretly hoping that we as teachers will bring the best of ourselves to the classroom so that they can rally to you as a teacher rather than to some of the norms they're seeing elsewhere, right? And that's extra work for us, but it is work that gets easier with practice and does lead to better results. I think I should probably leave it there. I think I'm at about 5 minutes. Yeah, 7 minutes. All right, I'll stop there. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That was incredible. I love the idea of talking about student engagement. All right, so now you've heard from 4 of the most incredible faculty members at Hunter. So now is your time to ask questions, ask for resources,